Hello, this is Lauren Deeg. I'm an Associate Professor of Urban Planning, teaching in our CAP first year program. This talk is going to be about what is design communication. Lauren Deeg again. Welcome to What is Design Communication, an introduction to our Design Communications Media courses, including CAP 161. So let's start by addressing the question, what is design communication? Well, we can kind of flip it on its end here and argue that design is communication. It's a form of communication. The design process is a communicative process in which we communicate ideas to other people and start to form them into solutions to problems or situations that we feel require a design solution, design process. So we can argue when we start to look at what design communication is, we find very quickly that design is a communicative process. Milton Glaser, one of the great graphic artists of our time, to design is to communicate clearly by whatever means you can control or master. And I feel that this particular quote is applicable to a lot of us working in the environmental design professions across planning, landscape architecture, interior design, product design, graphic design. Members of a team will come together from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different experiences, and then come together as a team. And whoever can control or master a particular type of technique or a particular media really rises to the top and contributes a good portion to the team. So as you start to think about your professional life and putting together a curriculum for yourself, a course path for yourself, a degree plan for yourself, just remember that we will work as teams in the future, and we all bring to the table our specific expertise and specialties that we master as we move along. But at the center of a lot of that, designers love to draw. It is the fastest, most efficient way that we can communicate an idea. So to communicate our design intentions to members of our teams, to communicate our design intentions to a client, to communicate design intention to a superior or a stakeholder or a funder, or the body politic or the public, for instance. We draw because it is the most efficient means by which we can transport ideas from our brain onto the page. But designers, particularly environmental designers, have taken on the phenomenon, if you will, of urban sketching as a way of learning and absorbing the lessons about space and place. We as emerging designers and planners are very interested in what makes good places, what makes a quality place. And so by spending time in these different places and sketching them, it allows us to absorb a lot more information than we would if we were just to take a photograph of it and move on. Paul Lasso is a professor emeritus at Ball State. He taught at Ball State many years. He was one of my professors when I went through the program. Takes drawing and sketching a little bit more calculated way than some folks do. He starts with the outer boundaries or major lines of something. He then starts to use that as a boundary or as a skeleton and starts to locate other spaces and things inside of that. Then allow other details and folds and edges and overlaps to exist within that. And then finally, he adds tone on top of that. This may be a very different way of drawing that some of you may be familiar with, but it's a process that Paul gave us in the sense that we could understand very much how something is designed and also how something is built by drawing it this particular way. We start with skeletal frameworks and proportions. When we design, we start to locate spaces and details within it. When we build something, we start with a frame, and then we start to add skins and layers and components to it. And then we finish it out with trim and paint and other exterior finishes and windows. So it's interesting to me that this four-step process, or these four drawings here, illustrates so much about what Paul taught us about sketching and drawing, but also what he taught us about how the built environment comes together, how buildings get built, how public spaces are formed. They start with general concepts and proportions. They add major details. They continue with components and overlaps and meetings. and then they end with finishes and materials. So this four-step sketch is really evocative of a lot of things that we'll be exploring in the design process in your years here at CAP. Drawing isn't just something that a few people do. It's not just a physical act. It's not a hobby that the person in the corner does. I began my life as drawing cartoons and vehicles and football players and things of that nature. It's not just a discipline. It's not just something that a few people do well or somebody that specializes in. Even though I have an illustration business on the side with clients that I do renderings for. And most importantly, this is not something you're born with. This is these are a sets of skills that can be learned and are learned by our graduates. Many of our good folks who come through CAP do have a love for drawing or a love for the arts and some experience with them. But some come with no experience whatsoever and take on these particular steps and exercises to build up their skills. And it goes back to the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. We explored this concept in one of our earlier talks this semester. The notion, or the didactic notion of challenges help me to grow and evolve as a person, versus the fixed mindset who doesn't like to be challenged, the person who is, when they're frustrated, just gives up. Drawing is no different than anything else in your learning experience or in your education. It requires a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So continue to explore this particular concept of the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset as you approach your personal education and your personal journey. We draw to unlock the mysteries of the built environment that we may apply those lessons later. We draw to unlock the mysteries of the built environment. What makes a good place? What makes a good space? What are the particular things that help us understand what makes a good place? And Paul was really helpful in terms of how he put together the drawing experience and an experience of sketching and drawing on site for a lot of people, for 2 or 3 generations of people. This is one of his favorite places in Paris. This is the Place des Vosges. It's very close to the Louvre on the north side of the Seine. And he starts to apply it, given his background in architectural education and as an architect and urban designer. He draws a plan view of the entire plaza, starts to break it up into zones, starts to proportion it out with the center axis and 4 quadrants. And then he takes an overhead plan view and he starts to break out one of the row houses, understand its relationship to the sun and to the orientation, starts to name different zones that he's starting to notice. And then he quickly sketched here a cut section or urban section or a cross section through the entire plaza to understand the relationship between plan and section. These are the names that we give these types of drawings. We'll learn a little bit more about that later. But it's something that, given his training as an architect, as an environmental designer, he just starts to automatically do to help understand what makes this place so attractive to Parisians. And Paul would vacation in Paris for a month at a time every year in the summers, and really enjoyed Paris and its public spaces. So he wanted to understand what makes this place tick and why people are so attracted to it. Is it the trees? Is it the shade? Is it seeing other people and other activity? Is it the sittable space? It's all those elements that we look for in placemaking in terms of what makes a great public space. And Paul would make drawings that were in plan or section in nature, in some cases an overhead view in nature, but also eye-level view. He would sketch these what we call character sketches or character perspectives to help understand the eye-level view, the difference between shade and sun, the amount or volume of sittable space, and what people were doing there. Children playing, folks walking, getting their shopping done, or just relaxing. He also was interested in the architecture around this public space and some of the key identifiers, this gateway building, if you will, a house that is built directly above a public passageway that takes us into the middle of the plaza from the street edge. So Paul's ways of drawing it to understand it are to sketch out the proportions, the geometry, the geometrical lines, the relationships of solid and void, the relationships of roof to wall to window to door, and then maybe accompany that with more of a character sketch that has a lot of shade and shadow and materials in it. Paul's sketchbooks are filled with little diagrams like this on the right and character sketches on the left, because he felt that these two different types of drawings helped him understand what made that place great. We see drawing as an act of seeing. It's an extension of your sense of sight. It is an act of stimulating memory. When we take a photograph with our phone or something, that represents a fraction of a second. When we take time to draw something as we observe it, it involves a lot more muscles. It involves stimulating our memory. It involves a lot of judgment and a lot of analysis and analytical thinking. It involves kinesthetic learning. These are the motor functions. This is your kinesthetic sense is what allows you to do a really good golf swing or throw a really good layup in basketball or a particular tennis swing. Those are the motor skills that are associated with it, as well as learning something visually. But as we said before, we draw to unlock the mysteries of the built environment for future application in the design process. So we draw good places to understand them, and then we draw in the design process later so that we might be influenced by them. Aha, a relationship here. A few more sketches from Paul Lassault, some very representative, some with more character than others, some focusing more on geometry and massing, some focusing on detail. And this variety here in his sketchbook just really helps him understand this particular Victorian house a little bit better than by just taking a photograph. As we said before, drawing is another way of seeing, an extension of your visual perception and cognition. The Noli Plan of Rome was a document that attempted to measure and draw every single human occupiable space, public space, in the city of Rome. Large squares or piazzas or plazas, colonnades or column entries or edges that might be protected from the sun, interior courtyards that open to the street or open to the piazza, small chapels that might be accessible from a street or from a doorway. All those magic things that people associate with the Eternal City. These drawings were instrumental in terms of understanding Rome to a generation of architects at the turn of the century. And it led to a particular way of drawing that allowed us to understand the relationships of buildings and open space to one another. Paul took that drawing and he interpreted it in an interesting way and said, yeah, well, I understand that all of these are buildings, and I understand that these are negative spaces and courtyards. Here's a chapel inside of a courtyard, for instance. Here's a small church or a chapel surrounded by a courtyard. Here's a portion of this particular civic space enveloping into another courtyard. So he very quickly starts to use a drawing technique to understand the built and the unbuilt. We call that the figure ground or the figure field diagram that helps us understand the built space or the private space versus the public space. And it's a diagram method and a drawing method that we use across all of the disciplines to help us really begin the design process, to understand what is built and what is unbuilt, what is occupied versus unoccupied. This might not mean a lot to you, but you might start to recognize it over time. This is CAP right here. This is the business building. This is the library. This is AJ. This is the Ball Communications building, RB, and the tower. This is a figure field or a figure ground diagram that we did as graduate students to help us understand the potential of this particular parking lot between AJ and Teachers College as a building site for a new student center. The project never happened. They decided to renovate Pittenger Student Center. It was a good decision, but nonetheless to examine that site as a potential building site. So this is a figure ground diagram that only examines the built and unbuilt, the open space versus the space occupied by buildings, with the addition of the major roadways. Another version of that starts to look at the building footprints and starts to read them as different edges. This is the architecture that we start to experience on this site as we walk around this portion of our Ball State campus. These are the edges we tend to experience the most. Now, our future East Mall will be running right through here. That's under construction now. But for the most part, at this time, 20 years ago, when we were experiencing architecture at Ball State on the campus, we were experiencing these edges and starting to see larger quad spaces emerging from there. Another diagram isolated another piece of information from the whole. If we take a look at this yellow here, this was a way that we could illustrate all of the pedestrian-oriented pathways that run through this particular portion of campus. We start to see a lot happening here. There's a rich pedestrian experience or zone in front of AJ. There isn't one next to Bracken Library. We can see some diagonal paths starting to run from the center of McKinley towards CAP and through CAP, if you will, and other pathways that take us into the Ball Communications and RB. And we started to see how this potential building site could be connected to other buildings. We isolated that pedestrian experience from the vehicular experience. We can see here the roadway illustrated in blue and the parking illustrated in pink. Now, this layer of information, very different than this layer of information. But by isolating information from one another, by starting to make digital drawings that helped us understand this information, we had a better understanding of how our campus worked at that particular time. In the field, or when we travel, these are a few sketches that I made in Europe, just having 20 minutes to help understand a hotel lobby a little bit better, the interesting design that goes into the design of this particular hotel desk and the different materials that come together. These sketches can be very rough and very quick and include some extra notes as well. This doesn't have to be framed art for somebody someday. It is a fast way of helping me remember this particular hotel lobby when I happened to have an extra 20 minutes on my hands. On this particular trip to Italy in Milan, the Duomo, or the Cathedral of Milan, was completely covered in scaffolding for the entire summer that we were there. So this image of the Duomo on a metro ticket, on a subway ticket, was pretty much my only memory of this portion of Milan. So I taped it into my sketchbook and I sketched over it. A form of collage or a form of non-objective or a form of alternative art, it can be a very liberating way of approaching your sketchbook as a catalog of memories, not just a catalog of sketches. Another drawing or sketch from that particular trip. This is drawing with a calligraphy pen. And this is in Verona, Italy, between Venice and Milan. Just a fast sketch of an urban scene, sitting in a cafe, having snack, and watching this pigeon trying to steal my food. Because I made this sketch, I have photographs. I don't know where they are now. They're on a hard drive somewhere. But because I made this sketch and scanned it and kept it, and I have that sketchbook, I'll remember this particular afternoon probably for the rest of my life, I hope. I'll probably remember that pigeon as well. Other sketches from my time in Europe, these wonderful scooters and Vespas, starting to look at the negative space that architecture starts to make, or the landscape starts to make when it hits the sky and interacts with other buildings. And I always like to draw people in the foreground, or people doing things, as well as focus on landmark architecture. It makes for more interesting memories of some of the folks that I gathered with or met on my travels, or in this case, the students that enrolled in this particular study abroad trip. Some of our alumni. This is Andrew Tarson. He is practicing out of San Francisco now. He spent a semester in Copenhagen, Denmark, as part of his undergraduate studies. That's an opportunity to file in the back of your head once we end our social distancing time. But if you're considering a study abroad opportunity, we have opportunities for you either for the summer or fall or spring semesters in Copenhagen. And these are drawings that he made just with ink pen in a loose leaf sketchbook or a bound sketchbook, dealing with the plan view or the figure ground view of this particular portion of the city. He starts to put in some notes and diagramming as well. He then blends that into a character sketch or perspective sketch of this particular scene with a lot of different buildings and open spaces there, and allows these two drawings just to coexist on the page. In the program in Copenhagen, they have excursions around Northern Europe and Central Europe. This is a trip to Helsinki to visit one of the sanitariums by the famous Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. So this is a sketch of the plan of the site, the 5 or 6 buildings that make up that complex, probably drawn from either from a map or in today's case is probably from a mapping application on a phone, as well as some notes and starting to use ways of dividing the page here is kind of interesting. He takes this tree here and it helps divide these two drawings from each other. He starts to use shade and shadow very, not liberally, but very succinctly, just to describe the effect of light and shade at this particular sanitarium. Another portion of his sketchbook, probably from the central square in Copenhagen. A famous pedestrian street runs through here. So this is a sketch of building footprints versus open space and public space, drawn in plan view, overhead view, starting to draw an elevation of 3 or 4 buildings together, and then another one of this landmark here, and then looking at maybe the statue of one of Denmark's monarchs. This sketchbook page can be turned to its side in order to read it differently, but Andy was quite happy just putting several of these drawings together on a page to remember a specific place. Another one of our graduates, Kristen Andre, she lives in Fort Wayne now. She went on Polyarc 2007, what was known as World Tour, 13 weeks traveling around the world, and learned some very specific sketching techniques for shade and shadow, but also to represent different materials. This is the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and this is a technique, one of a few, but a very good technique to represent running water. If you know the Trevi Fountain in Rome, it's one of the more famous places in Rome. And instead of drawing the whole thing, Kristen only focused on this portion of it, one of the victory horses here flanking over a 2 or 3 step waterfall as it dispels into the fountain. Other sketches from that trip, Ephesus, Greece, some of the great ruins, amphitheaters, and combining different sketches from her experience together on a single page. Very, very careful use of line, careful use of tone. And then Night, Stockholm, probably drawn with a Pentel sign pen. Just a very liberal application of ink to represent the setting sun on the urban landscape of Stockholm. Further on the trip was 13 weeks, and so they did travel to the Far East as well. And more techniques of understanding specific details or how building massing or materials approach the sun or public space in between. Combining technique of diagramming and cross sections to help understand some of the specific aspects of these developments. And then further on in other places, Helsinki, Madrid, you can see Kristen here is very interested in a cross-section of things. This is called the Rock Church in Helsinki, and she's very interested in how light passes into this particular church and how people approach through it. So cross-sectional diagram, as well as plan view diagrams, are helping her understand the different minutiae of these different spaces. Those types of drawings that I mentioned previously here come together in a collection of drawings that we call the orthographic conventions. This is not like a convention at a convention hall, but it is a collection of conventional drawings that come together to represent space and place. And so we call them orthographic because they represent all of the 6 views of a figure. So if we were to imagine a design piece of stuff in the middle here, this could be an object, this could be a building, could be a lot of different things, but we tend to project different planes, these different picture planes. This is a picture plane here examining this particular building from this side, And you can see all the edges project to that picture plane and form a true elevation of that building. If we look at this left side, there's a picture plane which all of the edges and lines are projected to it. We have a full representation in true length and true measurement of what that building might be on the left. And then if we project down, we begin to look at what might be seen overhead. Here's the two roof planes here, as well as maybe this is a chimney or tower, and we would see them as a roof plane. So the orthographic conventions allow us to see a piece of stuff in all of the orthogonal views and communicate our design intentions to folks that might construct them. And so without perspective distortion, with true length and true measurements represented, we tend to make a set of drawings at scale that can be read by a construction team. And we do that at scale so that it fits on a piece of paper, and so that we can measure and assess and purchase and install materials and components later. So these types of drawings are very helpful in the construction process as we make estimates and as we start to assess the different materials to come together. The orthographic drawing is a scalable, measured drawing that allows us to assess the constructability of a concept. Most of you are familiar with the orthographic drawing known as plan view or a floor plan view. This is the Schwartz House by Frank Lloyd Wright. At the top here is a simple floor plan with the roof completely removed and looking at the things that are visible approximately 3 or 4 feet up from the floor. So we can start to see some staircases, some furniture, a lot of French doors that open to the outside, and perhaps the differences between exterior space, interior space, and the solids and voids. If we apply a little bit of line weight, we call this line weight or hierarchy of line, we can understand better what portion this floor plan is cutting through, that this might be a solid wall, that this might be a slab or another piece of material representing an exterior patio. So a floor plan then helps us understand and navigate the different spaces that go into a design project. A site plan is if you were to imagine zooming out from that scale and imagine what a bird might see as they fly over the site. So a site plan is like a floor plan, and everything remains a scaled measurement and drawn to a particular scale. I can scale this edge of the building to whatever scale the drawing is made, and that helps us understand its relationship of the building on its site. We can cast shadows from it and start to communicate its intentions around the sun. We can use topographic lines to represent changes in elevation of the ground. And so we see an entry road coming through here, probably going uphill into the driveway and perhaps a garage or exterior space out here, maybe orienting to the main entry as well. But also having a few landscape features, whether they be terracing or in this case, a clump of trees or a tree line here. With these simple techniques, we can come together and help understand the relationship of this building to its immediate site. And so all of these techniques that we're seeing here are techniques that we'll learn how to do as we start to make our own design drawings in the very near future. A section, I mentioned cross-sectional drawings earlier. Here's some more representations of that. If a building were like a pepper and you were to take a knife and cut that pepper and then pull it apart, we might start to see something like this. So if the floor plan of this church represents the human experience on that main floor with the columns arranged in such a way to form the nave and chancel of this particular church, a cross-sectional diagram or a cross-sectional drawing helps us understand the height of those spaces. Here's a human being down here, and here they are in the middle of this church, perhaps in the middle of a domed enclosure that might be right there in the middle of the church. We can also direct our viewer to where these particular cross-sectional drawings are located. So this is the floor plan representing the human experience of the first floor, the solid and the void. We can see that this flag here and this line here represents that this cross-section, the longitudinal section, is the experience, the human experience or spatial experience running lengthways through this church. We can even see that these drawings are lined up and that the central space of the church is here. That represents the tallest, most magnificent space here. This might represent the altar here on the left. This might represent the grade change here. We can see the steps right there up to the altar. We can see the steps here in this section. And it helps us understand how this church might be built. The cross section is located with this flag, this line, and this flag. So it tells our viewer, hey, there's another drawing here to look at, and it's taken right here. So this drawing here represents the portions of the solid and the void that one sees as they travel along this line. This wall here, these columns here, and then the side nave over here. And these two cross sections, it makes sense for them to line up because they share a few dimensions. And so put these three drawings together, we have a much better understanding of how this church might come together as a project in the future and how it might be built. Frank Ching, the author of your textbooks, has a lot of really rich drawings as examples from his work over the years of existing buildings as well as some of the projects he's done. This is the Woodland Chapel by Erik Gunnar Asplund. This is a funeral chapel in Sweden. And here Frank is using some different characteristics of line, tone, line weight, and texture to represent the different spaces of this crematory chapel. A lot of folks are cremated in this part of the world, and so when someone goes to a funeral, they might be witnessing that portion of that end-of-life experience. And so these are two different drawings of the chapel in terms of how they might be read as a human experience, coming from the landscape and into this sacred space. Drawings come together to form comprehensive presentations. When we present a project to a client, we might begin with a site plan. We might include a series of floor plans or structural plans. We might include a full series of elevations, both the front and the two sides and the rear. We might include a cross-section through the project. We might include a perspective view that shows the project in the landscape. And so, again, no matter which discipline we choose, a series of drawings, a series of diagrams, a series of conventional drawings come together to form the most comprehensive picture of the project that we can make. My friend Salah Uddin, he teaches down in Atlanta, wrote a wonderful book called Composite Drawings. And it starts to look at how different drawing conventions can come together. Here's an overhead view of a landscape that has some very rich color applications. This is by Michael Doyle. Some of Muhammad's work itself, just some colored pencil and some ink line, maybe a little bit of a collage brought in, but how plan and section, this is a section through a site, and this is an overhead plan, might come together to form a single drawing. Put that together with a perspective, you have a comprehensive idea of this particular project. This one I really love. This is by R.D. Ferrer, probably from 25 or 30 years ago, but these drawings line up so beautifully in terms of how these different cross sections shows us exactly how the tower integrates into the site. This is the overhead plan here. Here's some material details here, an overhead oblique, as well as some other smaller material decisions, framed together with some experiential views of the tower on this lake from different distances. Put together, this is a hand drawing that really is very rich, probably colored pencils on board, done 25, 30 years ago or so. But there still is a great tradition of how these different drawings can come together to form the most comprehensive vision for the design intention. Other materials and other methods. This is colored pencil on black mat board. something we used to do back in the day, but still really fun to do because of how Matboard grips different colored pencils and just really allows the color to sing. Another one. This is colored pencil on gray Matboard. So different materials and different boards might lend themselves to different techniques by which we can explore architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning, and some of the artistic ways of representing space. We live in a digital age, however, and so you have wonderful opportunities on Instagram, the most visual of the social medias, for different illustrators and designers to share their work with the world. And so we're in an interesting era right now that has been classified as post-digital. It's the combination of really simple digital modeling exported quickly to Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop, bringing together several different predetermined elements, whether it be scale figures, textures, skies, colors, or surfaces, and plants, and very quickly collaged together. It's an interesting phenomenon that has really taken over architectural drawing over the last couple of years, and architecture schools all over the world. But it is an interesting, elegant, minimalist way of approaching architectural drawing using some predetermined elements that can be quickly downloaded and stored so that one can efficiently put together a presentation quickly. And I think that's probably why it's caught on. But there are several techniques involved here, understanding where shade and shadow occurs, understanding the representation from these human figures and even this dog casting a shadow onto the ground. But put that all together, and one has a very elegant, well-composed, balanced vision of how this project might move forward. Others are more precise, or more photorealistic, perhaps. So here's a presentation drawing from Field Operations, a well-known landscape architecture firm that are known for their work on the High Line in New York. So here's a combination of AutoCAD, probably an export from AutoCAD, quickly putting together a plan view, an overhead plan involving the location of a few plants. And you can see how they line up. This palm is connected right, these are lined up here. This pavilion is lined up here. So the relationship between plan and section is very clear here. We're probably looking at a multi-level terrace, I'm guessing here, based on what we're seeing here. So probably the public street or boardwalk or pier overlook, as I can see here, coming together. A couple of different levels that one might reach a belvedere or a promontory overlooking a nice view, given the notes here. But these are all predetermined elements in Photoshop that are stored in a digital library and that are collaged together in Photoshop on top of this very basic CAD plan. So it's a way of quickly turning out a presentation drawing from the orthographic drawings that we make of plan and section into something that's presentation worthy for a client. Another one that just came out this summer, this is a comprehensive urban design district proposal. Urban design is arguably the fusion or the intersection between architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning. But it is a design project that it encapsulates much more than one building or one street. As you can see here, we're looking at an overhead view using the figure ground mentality. These might be existing buildings in the gray. These might be proposed buildings in the orange. And that contrast there really makes them pop and helps us understand, oh, this is what's being proposed. Oh, that's proposed. It's to be new. And then quickly, a lot of different legends and notes are pulled off of this district plan. So if you're interested in this type of work, it's an interesting fusion of the three, or overlap of the three disciplines. And then he starts to pull off different perspectival views very quickly. A plan, as you can see, though, can have a lot of information layered over it. We use Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop to do that. We might use different diagrams to illustrate different things, whether it be tree cover or circulation or services or public transit or things like that. So we often diagram a lot of information or pull information off of that. And even though this is in a different language, it starts to read as we can start to see what this means. This probably means human circulation. These are the blocks here. These would be different land uses versus other land uses versus public space. And then a series of collaged Adobe Photoshop renderings that might involve some very simple massing in a program like SketchUp or a program like Rhino, exporting these massings with not a lot of detail, but enough detail to describe the intentions of this urban development, and then collage it together with predetermined elements, people, of texture, paving, some pop art, maybe existing buildings in the background, this interesting World War I era aircraft, plants, and street furniture. And you can see the existing building there in the background. So this type of drawing, it involves the latest and greatest software in Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator to quickly put together a digital presentation that shows the intention for a new urban district. So look forward to these techniques in the second semester, and look forward to how sketching and drawing continues to change. This is the Morpholio app for the iPad Pro. It's an app that I've written an article about for Landscape Architecture magazine, and one which has the ability to really start to take hand sketching to a new dimension. Whereas a lot of us were trained to draw with paper, Morpholio is an example of an app that has brought the iPad Pro to the designer, a new tool for a lot of interesting iterations, overdoing and doing over and overdoing, and reviews. So, to get started, some of the basic materials that we will start to use are here. So, a large retractable knife is really good. This has a blade that extends out with a lever and a button, and as the blade becomes dull, you can snap off the portions of the blade that are dull. So it always keeps the blade sharp. So large retractable knife is good. Carpenter's knife could also work in that capacity as well. A small retractable knife works the same way. And again, as the blade gets dull, you can snap these off and place them into the sharps container. An X-Acto knife, our standard X-Acto blade, number 10 or number 11 blade. This is the same blade that a surgeon uses when they open you up. So if you hear 10 blade, it is something that medical professionals know. This is actually the same thing. So do be careful when you work with these blades and with these knives to make precision cuts and crafting. Good pair of scissors is always great because it means that a very simple cut through thin material doesn't have to go through perhaps all of the steps of cutting something with the blade. So a good pair of scissors can be a great time saver. By the way, all of these blades should be used with what is called a self-healing mat. They typically are green or gray. We often call that a cutting mat, and those are available at craft stores and fabric stores. It helps keep the blades sharp, and it also preserves your tabletop. Basic sketching materials, soft lead pencil or lead holder. You can see a retractable lead here, a standard number 2 pencil. I really love my Dixon Ticonderoga. There might be other softness of pencils in a range from H to B. For example, most of our number 2 pencils are either a 2H or a 2B. And pencils are rated in terms of their softness on the B scale all the way to a 4B, 5B, or 6B. Hardness from 2H to 3H to 4H. But if you have a set of pencils, that's great. If not, then just go for some of the things that are in the middle, and maybe a 4 or 6B as a soft lead pencil. We say lead, it's actually graphite. Drawing pens or sketching pens, there's a couple of brands here that I like that we have ordered for you for sale at the CRC. We also have a great partnership with Karen's Art Mart in the village. She orders a lot of these things for us so that they're available to the students. Pens that have been really popular with environmental designers over the past few years include the Pilot Fineliner and the Pentel Sign Pen. These were developed in the 1960s and are still popular today. So these are felt tip pens, soft bullet felt tip pens. They don't last forever, but they are inexpensive enough that at $1.75 or $2 will last you a reasonable amount of time to put some ink on paper. Other tools and materials, starting to think about precision drafting or measured drawings, roll of drafting tape, triangles. They come in a couple of different sizes and a couple of different orientations, including a 30-60-90 triangle or a 45-45-90 triangle. Circle template, really great for starting to draw trees and other geometric figures in plan view or in elevation view. An architect scale and an engineer scale. These help us draw things to a representative scale so that the scale of a building or a site or of a city can fit on a drawing. We'll talk more about that in terms of what scale means and how to read one of these and how to make measured drawings from these. But it's good to have an engineer scale and an architect scale on hand. Engineer scale are used by landscape architects and planners. The architect scale, self-explanatory. They represent two full ranges of scales, the building or human or material scale, and then the site or urban scale. So they represent two full ranges of scales as a category of measured drawings. Other more precision pens and pencils. A lot of you have mechanical pencils of different qualities. Growing up in hand drafting in the 1980s and 90s, of course, these were things that allowed us to make precision lines. There's different pencils that are available for that, different widths or weights of pens. So they come in different sizes or widths, either probably based on millimeters. There's a couple brands out there. The Micron is a good brand that is archival ink. The Zig is a different type of pigment ink. Sometimes they work better than others, so you may want to try a couple of these. Visit an art store and try a couple of these pens and find out what you like, but you'll want the ability to make different marks, different line weights, different line widths, or different characters of line, and these different pens help you start to do that. Pitt pen, these are brush pens, or also come in other widths and measurements. It's a Faber-Castell brand. It's a competitor to the Zig and to the Micron. But just kind of browse through Karen's Art Mart and other places and kind of find out what you like. Roll trace. This is a lot of folks have different names for this. Some people call it bum wad. Some people call it onion skin. It's typically called tracing paper or overlap paper. If you've worked in food service, it really does look like bakery parchment. It's very similar to that. But we sell this in rolls in different sizes, 12-inch rolls, 18-inch rolls, 24-inch rolls. Really good to have at least a 12-inch roll to start out your studies here. We use this for sketching. We use it for overlaying things. Because it's a translucent medium, it allows us to trace things. That's why it's called roll trace or tracing paper. Because we're often dealing with some predetermined information, whether it be an existing building, an existing site, or layers of a project. So we work in layers, and it helps to have a layered paper that allows us to work quickly with different layers. It also is inexpensive in terms of cost per square inch. A white plastic eraser is really efficient because it picks up our lines really efficiently. We might start to lay something out in pencil, draw it over in pen, and then be able to pick those lines up. So that's an overview of some of the materials that can help you get started. Not all of them, but quite a few of them to help us get started. Again, soft lead pencil from 2 probably to 4 or even 6. And each project that we do we'll have more guidelines in terms of the materials that you will need for success in the DCM course as well as the studio. Thank you very much.